turn it over to Dr. Allison Parker. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here and really look forward to participating in this. I think it's incredibly important to take the time to really think about what it means to be working together with the Institute for Common Power in this 24-hour teach-in in Florida, when so many states and localities, not just Florida, are considering bills that are banning the teaching of difficult or challenging histories, which really means Black history and the history of gender and sexualities. So that means that it's more important than ever to really teach these subjects and show why this history matters. And so that's what I'm going to be doing today. And so I'll share my screen and then we'll move on from there. Just one moment. From the beginning. Okay, there we go. Hopefully you can all see that. And basically, in the time that we have together, I want to give you an historical example of how Black women took collective action to challenge injustices, including in the carceral system. To do so, I'll focus on the active of a leading Black clubwoman and civil rights activist who, for the first 5 decades of the 20th century, went into prisons, met with Black women who were unjustly condemned for the crime of defending themselves against attacks by white men and women. And she also met with governors and other political leaders to advocate for the women's pardons or release. And I'm drawing the material from for this teach-in from my biography of Mary Church Terrell, which is titled Unceasing Militant. To provide you with some context for her cross-class activism on behalf of Black women ensnared in the carceral system, I'm going to start by giving you a very brief overview of Mary Church Terrell's life. She was born enslaved in 1863 in Memphis, Tennessee, and was educated later at Oberlin College, and then appointed as the first Black woman on the District of Columbia's Board of Education. In 1896, she was elected as the first president of the National Association of Colored Women, or NACW. And in 1909, Terrell helped found the NAACP. During World War I, she picketed the White House for women's suffrage with the National Women's Party and created the Wage Earners Association to unionize Black women workers. In the 1920s, she was a founding member of the International Council of Women of the Darker Races. And in the 1930s, she continued her activism in the NAACP and joined with the Communist Party's International Labor Defense on behalf of the Scottsboro Nine, the 9 Black teenagers who were wrongly accused of rape of 2 young white women and who were unfairly condemned to death. Then in the late 1940s and early 1950s, Terrell chaired 2 important committees affiliated with the Communist Party, including one whose direct action protests and legal challenges successfully dismantled segregation in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. And this is her in her late 80s. So in any event, Unceasing Militant gets its title from the Black radical activist, singer, and actor Paul Robeson, whose 1954 eulogy of Terrell commemorated her unceasing militant struggle for the full citizenship of her people. And one of the things that I think is instructive for us to look at her life is this unceasing militancy, the fact that she was an activist throughout her life and realized that activism doesn't come at one particular moment, but is something that's lifelong. Now, some writers have argued that Black club women, including Terrell, were elites who were removed from the majority of poor and working class Black women. But in fact, Black club women were at the vanguard of the battle against the forces of white supremacy and anti-Black racism. The National Association of Colored Women, which was formed in 1896, was the first national secular Black organization, not just the first one for women. And it laid the foundation for Black political activism in the 20th century and beyond. Terrell became the first president of the National Association of Colored Women, and this is from their first meeting. This is Terrell with the hat with the flowers and the fruit. This is anti-lynching activist and clubwoman Ida B. Wells Barnett. This is her baby, Charles Barnett, and in the hands of the baby is in the hands of Alice Dunbar Nelson, who was an activist and writer, and among many other things. So at their first 1896 convention, NACW delegates vowed to denounce lynchings and recommend the passage of laws requiring counties to pay large fines to the state and full indemnity to the family of persons lynched. So they were advocating for a form of reparations to families of those who were lynched in the late 1800s. And in addition, they opposed the convict lease labor system, which we just heard about, that had spread throughout the South. So as we heard, Black Americans charged with small infractions were given huge fines and then forced to work in truly inhumane conditions to pay off their fines. The club women also denounced segregation on streetcars and advocated for federal anti-lynching legislation. When she was elected as the National Association of Colored Women's first president in 1896, Mary Church Terrell was pregnant for the third time and was facing continued tragic losses surrounding reproduction. Her pregnancy ended with the birth of a living infant who died in a segregated hospital in a makeshift incubator. Coping with her loss, Terrell poured her energy into her leadership role, condemning the fact that African American women of all classes experienced institutional and daily racism, including obstructive access to education and employment. But as we just saw, they also experienced health disparities and disproportionate maternal and infant mortality. Knowing the danger of infant mortality from personal experience, Terrell highlighted disturbing race-based disparities. The health of our race is becoming a matter of deep concern to many who are alarmed by statistics showing how great the death rate is among us as compared with that of the whites. It is unacceptable that these terrible racial health disparities for Black women and their infants are still as true today. Terrell's encouragement of young Black women to enter nursing and medical schools reflected her recognition that African Americans needed quality health care from well-trained professionals who had a vested interest in their survival and ability to thrive. To raise fit and healthy children, Terrell argued, Black mothers needed assistance, training, and support, like daycare programs. Focusing on institution building, Terrell established the first NACW fund to establish free kindergartners for Black working class women's children. Her maternalist focus and appropriation of the rhetoric of domesticity was actually inherently subversive, since Black women were perceived by most whites as being either unsexed domestic laborers, mammies, or as over-sexualized and impure, not as caring, concerned mothers. Black club women and activists engaged in cross-class efforts to achieve equality by challenging racist and sexist stereotypes about Black women as sexually impure. They also defended the lives of Black women caught up in the criminal justice system. Black women organized in the NACW in part to provide themselves with a national platform from which to defend themselves against slander by hostile whites. Such slander had become an excuse for dismissing concerns about sexual violence against Black women. When a white organization called the National Purity Association invited Mary Church Terrell to give a talk on purity and the Negro in 1905, she took the opportunity to comprehensively lay out her Black feminist ideas about the intersections of race, gender, class, and purity. She used her time at the lectern to dispute whites' assumption that African Americans were innately more immoral and impure. Shifting the blame to white men, Terrell defended the honor of Black women, reminding her audience that during slavery, it was impossible for bondwomen to protect themselves from the lust of their masters. Highlighting the vulnerability of Black women to rape by white men, she charged that even in the 20th century, colored women have been regarded as the rightful prey of every white man, and they have been protected from the wiles and lechery of their destroyers, neither by public sentiment nor by law. Crimes against Black women must be taken as seriously as those against white women, Terrell insisted. She reiterated that white male violence undermined the sanctified categories of home and womanhood. In the South, the Negro's home is not considered sacred by the superior race. White men are neither punished for invading it nor lynched for violating colored women and girls. Condemning a double standard of sexual purity, she contended that until the day when rape was a crime, no matter the race of the victim, Black women would not be recognized as full human beings, and white men would continue to claim superiority while acting with impunity, whereas Black men would be unfairly accused and even murdered for rapes they did not commit. Terrell bluntly told her audience, morally speaking, slavery was a weapon which shot both ways, wounding those who fired as well as those who were hit. Surely, white women must know that so long as men may despoil the women of any race with impunity, their prevailing standard of morality must necessarily be very low. Terrell and other Black women directly supported young Black women caught up in the workings of a racist carceral state. At the National Association of Colored Women's 1912 convention in Hampton, Virginia, for example, Terrell helped draw up a petition of club women asking for clemency in the case of a 16-year-old girl, Virginia Christian, who was awaiting execution for murdering her abusive white employer when she was only 13 years old. According to Christian's account, as reported in the press, she washed clothes for a wealthy widowed mother of 8 who falsely accused her of stealing a piece of jewelry and then threatened, "I'm going to put you in jail." They argued until her employer threw a spittoon that hit Christian, and the two began to fight physically. Christian told a reporter, "I never meant to kill her." Some middle-class African Americans in Hampton distanced themselves from the poor and poorly educated Black girl, but Terrell and the NACW came to her defense and rejected the use of the death penalty for the teenager. Terrell chaired a small contingent, bringing a petition signed by 300 Black club women to Virginia Governor William Hodges Mann, asking him to commute Christian's life sentence to life in prison. Given, quote, the extreme youth of this unfortunate girl, the lack of training during her childhood, and the neglect for which she was not responsible. The governor listened to the delegation and granted the women a visit with Christian in prison. He also granted the teenager a 10-day stay of execution so civil rights activists could find more exculpatory evidence. Yet he also indicated that he had no intention of commuting her sentence. Upon returning to the convention, Terrell's committee issued a pessimistic report, but in a show of appreciation for their efforts, NACW member, businesswoman, and philanthropist, Madam C.J. Walker, paid for their travel expenses to the Capitol. Based on the Club Women's report, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People hired investigators to help, and 500 Northern Blacks and whites who opposed capital punishment wrote letters to the governor. But the death of a white woman could not go unpunished. Virginia Christian was electrocuted on August 16, 1912, the first and last teenage girl in the US to be executed by electric chair. Later, after the Washington, D.C. riots of 1919, when rampaging whites attacked African Americans, Terrell again tried to help to defend a Black teenage girl named Clara or Carrie Johnson, this time against the false charge of murder after a police officer died. The Johnson family home was shockingly invaded by gun-wielding, plainclothes white police detectives during the 1919 riots. At the time of the police officer's death, the Washington Post treated him like a hero and raised hundreds of dollars for his family. The newspaper described the officer as killed Monday night while attempting to arrest a Negro girl who was firing upon a group of white men. Terrell and other Black Washingtonians knew that this murder charge against Carrie Johnson was patently unfair and wrong. A 16-year-old Johnson had been hiding in her own home during the riot. Terrell explained in her diary that Johnson was crouched under a bed with a mob of whites rushing into her house, shooting in every direction. A detective was killed. She was accused of shooting him. The evidence was only circumstantial. No gun was found. After the riots, African Americans like Carrie Johnson were charged with murder and other serious crimes and were held without trial for as long as a year and a half. In January 1921, the Black Club women and civil rights activists Mary Church Terrell and Elizabeth Carter, who is the current president of the Northeastern Federation of the National Association of Colored Women, met with the U.S. District Attorney to advocate fair treatment for the now 18-year-old Carrie Johnson. They found the district attorney to be surprisingly reasonable. Terrell recorded in her diary. He said her trial had been postponed till public sentiment against her subsided. He was very fair-spoken. He said he had grave doubts that the girl had shot the police van, that if she did not do so deliberately, and that if she did shoot him, she had a right to do so. This was such a big concession that Terrell seized on it. I asked him if he would tell the jury this. He promised to do so. He urged me to tell people that he was not responsible for keeping the girl in jail for 18 months without a trial. Now optimistic about Johnson's chance of being acquitted, Terrell was therefore devastated when Carrie Johnson was convicted of manslaughter, the most unjust verdict ever rendered. Seeing it for what it was, Terrell grimly concluded, the all-white jury served notice on colored people that if they defend themselves during a riot, they will be convicted of murder if they kill a white man, even in self-defense. Still hoping to intervene at the sentencing phase, Terrell visited the District Supreme Court to see Judge Ashley Gould. She begged him to be merciful. He promised to do so when he sentenced her, taking into consideration that she had already been in jail 18 months, which he said was an outrage. But the judge also misled Terrell regarding his intentions. After the next day's sentencing, Terrell recorded more of their conversation from the day before, realizing that he had not been honest with her. Yesterday, when I was pleading with Judge Gould on Carrie Johnson's behalf, I said I would have told the jury I shot in self-defense. If the girl had said that, he declared, the jury would have acquitted her. So the judge was indirectly absolving the jury of responsibility, blaming an inadequate defense for Johnson's conviction. Dismayed that both the judge and the district attorney had misled her and her fellow club women, Terrell reacted passionately after the sentencing, which she had attended to show support for Johnson. I saw the district attorney, Van Dorn, and said, here is that wretched man who convicted that poor innocent girl. Van Dorn countered that he had only wanted to show both sides of the case. Terrell was so upset by Johnson's conviction and sentence that she called a white male public official a wretched man to his face. In fact, Terrell's outrage was not misplaced. Carrie Johnson's conviction was so egregious that it was overturned 6 months later. And then in June of 1921, Johnson filed a motion for a new trial, which could bring up the plea of self-defense. When her petition was granted, the prosecutor dropped the charges and Johnson was released. It is not coincidental that defending Black women from institutional violence of the U.S. criminal justice system, as well as from rape by white men, drove the activism of generations of civil rights activists, including two icons, Mary Church Terrell and Rosa Parks. A decade before Parks initiated the Montgomery bus boycott, the two women worked on the same case in 1945. The much younger Parks formed the Committee for Equal Justice for Mrs. Recy Taylor, a rural Alabama woman who had been gang raped by 6 white men who abducted her as she walked home from church. Rosa Parks could not accept that Taylor's assailants were well known in the community, but were free without any investigation into their crime. Terrell joined the National Board of Advisors of Parks's Committee for Equal Justice, demanding that a formal investigation be conducted so the men could be held accountable for their violent crime. Despite the women's efforts, the men were never even indicted. Another opportunity for a cross-class alliance to defend a Black woman came in the case of Rosalie Ingram, a widowed Black sharecropper and a mother of 14 with 12 living children. Ingram was beaten over the head with a gun by her neighbor, a white male sharecropper. In an interview with the Black newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier, Ingram revealed that her assailant was a predator who had tried to sexually assault her in the past. 2 of Ingram's younger sons ran for help from their 16-year-old brother, who took the man's gun and struck him on the head. Her assailant died, and Rosalie Ingram and 2 of her teenage sons were charged, tried, convicted, and condemned to death by electric chair in 1948, although their lawyers had argued that they were innocent on grounds of self-defense. Once word of the death sentences spread to the national Black press, a huge outcry ensued, leading to a grassroots campaign to overturn their unfair sentences. In 1948, a delegation of women, including Mary Church Terrell, met with President Truman and the Attorney General to demand their intervention. In an uneasy alliance, the NAACP worked on a legal defense while a Communist Party organization focused on developing public support and fundraising appeals to assist with the other Ingram children. Public attention and pressure led the local judge to commute the Ingram sentences to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 7 years. And here you see a group of Black women and attending a hearing to try to support the Ingram family. The commutation of the Ingram sentences ended the NAACP's legal defense options, but opened the door to organizing of public protests demanding pardons or early parole. In 1949, 3 Black women, Ada Jackson of Churchwomen United, Maud White Katz, a Communist Party activist, and the civil rights activist Mary Church Terrell, formed the National Committee to Free the Ingram Family, with Terrell, now in her late 80s, as the chair. The committee sent interracial delegations to meet with the Ingram family, as well as with Georgia's segregationist governor, Herman Talmadge. Terrell took the lead in planning for a group of women to gather in DC to implore President Harry Truman to intervene. To escape the bad publicity of rejecting their appeals directly, Truman refused to meet with the women. And although the delegates had not secured an invitation, Terrell accompanied them to the White House while saying to the press, "It would be a shame to have 50 or 100 women come here just to have their picture taken." Their actions brought media attention and put pressure on officials to consider the case of a poor African-American woman punished by the criminal justice system as if she had been the assailant. Terrell's Ingram Committee also held interracial prayer vigils, sent delegations of women to Georgia, and mailed thousands of pointed Mother's Day cards to President Truman. And here it says, "I miss my children so bad. This can happen to your mother too." And so these are the kinds of messages that they were trying to raise. The National Committee to Free the Ingram Family gathered an impressive 30,000 signatures on a petition to the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations. Black women activists viewed the UN as an important international forum at which they could level a formal protest against legally sanctioned racism in the United States. Speaking before the UN Human Rights Commission in 1949, Terrell formally presented a petition on behalf of Mrs. Ingram as an individual and for colored women on general principles of discrimination. The petitioners protested gendered, sexualized racism and violence in the United States, with the Ingram case as one example. In Terrell's UN speech, she protested against the inhumane and unjust treatment of Black Americans. She highlighted the failures of the US, the so-called greatest democracy on earth, hoping to ameliorate the conditions under which thousands of colored people are forced to live, conditions as unjust, cruel, and shocking as any which history records. The case of Rosalie Ingram provided a way to protest the carceral system in the US more broadly. Terrell emphasized the racist double standard at work. Under similar circumstances, it is inconceivable that such an unjust sentence would have been imposed on a white woman with her 2 sons. Using this international forum to criticize the US, Terrell pushed back sharply against its claims to democracy and freedom, critiquing them as mere Cold War rhetoric with no substantive equality of treatment behind them. Emphasizing the intersectional nature of race and sex discrimination in the US, Terrell reiterated her long-held claim that Black women encountered difficulties and disappointments at every turn. The white women of the country have only one handicap to hurdle, that of sex. Colored men have just one handicap to hurdle, that of race. Colored women have 2 high, hard handicaps to hurdle, both race and sex. Ingram's situation, she insisted, was not an anomaly. A colored woman who is the victim of a white man's advances or violence has no redress in the courts. The intrepid Terrell kept the Ingram case in the public eye into her 91st year while she highlighted Black women's defense of themselves and continued to fight for desegregation in DC, which is what the image is of. In a dominant culture that defined white women as the only victims of rape, Terrell condemned the mistreatment and sexual abuse of African American women at the hands of white men, especially those in vulnerable jobs such as domestic service. Insisting upon the full humanity and just treatment of Black girls and women, she pointed out that those caught up in the criminal justice system had little ability to exercise their citizenship rights. And so, activist Black women like Terrell worked for and with them. Thank you.
Dr. Parker, thank you so much for this.
Oh,
I'm David Damke. It's nice to meet you. I used to be a professor at the University of Washington, and I know a number of the faculty in the Communication Studies program at the University of Delaware.
Oh, great.
So I have a lot of respect for the university there, and I had a question for you. I've been one of the hosts for this evening through the easy evening hours, and so it's 7:14 for you in Delaware, if you're in Delaware. Yeah. What has been the legal environment for Delaware in Delaware? Has there been any of the similar kind of anti-quote woke legislation or CRT or divisive concepts legislation there in the state?
No, we're really lucky to be in Joe Biden's home state with, in terms of where he spent a lot of time. It's a very blue state, and people are really paying attention to the things that are going on elsewhere and have been resisting those laws. In fact, we worked, many professors at the University of Delaware worked with the legislature and legislators in Delaware to pass House Bill 198, which mandates infusing Black history throughout the entire curriculum of the K through 12 school system here. So we have a very different situation. We have had the occasional person who's joined campaigns to get on the school boards advocating for censorship, and those people have been defeated thus far. So we're keeping a really close eye out because it's at those local district races that we have some real dangers.
Okay. Then just as a follow-up question for that, and then we'll let you go. You're a chair of the history department, though, so I'm going to guess that you have plenty of colleagues at other institutions, and that there's some vigorous discussion at the national level in different historian associations about the attack on education. Certainly Florida, we're in Florida for this teaching, but it's not just Florida, of course, it's a number of states, Virginia and Texas and Arkansas and Indiana and others. And Ron DeSantis is about to announce his candidacy for the presidency, and so he's clearly going to run on this as a core issue. What is your broader kind of sense of the feeling among public university academics today?
Well, I think that public university academics today are alarmed and concerned and want to fight back because they know that the histories and the work that we've all been doing can't happen if we're not allowed to tell difficult and challenging stories, if history is being blocked, if you can't talk about gender and sexuality. None of the work that we do can happen if those things are being banned. And as we've seen in Florida, gender studies, there was a bill to ban gender studies at the college level. So this is not something that we can even just say, oh, it's about what's happening in the lower level schools. So
Sure.
the American Historical Association and the Organization of American Historians, among other of the history organizations, is all working really hard to send letters, join protests, create teach-ins of their own. All kinds of things are happening to make sure that people are aware that this is an issue that they have to fight in every state.
Thank you so much for the work you presented today, you presented here, and also I was a department chair for a number of years, so thank you. That is God's work right there. Okay, so thank you so much for that. And we're honored to have you with us.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed it.